So, a lot of people think when people celebrated the Lord's Supper, there was actually a supper. And I think First Corinthians speaks to that. I think Paul, writing to the Corinthian church, when he talks about the misconduct that is happening during the Lord's Supper, it seems that people are actually getting together and eating. Now, I think this makes the sacrament look a lot different than what we experience in just about every Christian church in the world. Like every single Christian church in the world, I think we may be getting like a quick picture of the sacrament. It's like Jesus' body, Jesus' blood, and unity. I feel we're missing out. I feel that a lot of the things it talks about in chapter 11, when it talks about the Lord's Supper, I think there's actually something special in regards to eating with each other while partaking in this symbolism of Christ giving his body, the symbolism of Christ giving his blood, and us becoming one with Christ in the sacrifice. There's something that's being missed out on when you don't have a meal with it. I think that when we sit down and eat together, we have an opportunity to be closer to each other and experience the sacrament in a fuller way. I don't know if you go to a church and as soon as you take in that symbolic blood and body, that sip of wine and either a chunk of bread or a crumb of a cracker. I don't know if you feel closer to everybody in your church when that happens, but when I look at this passage, I feel like something's missing. I feel, when I look at chapter 11, verses 17 through 34, yeah, something doesn't sit right with me. And as I go through this and talk about it, I think you'll see why. I dream of having a church where we have communion alongside a meal. Like maybe there's some sort of potluck dinner, like churches often have in America, but apparently never with communion, or very rarely with communion. I went to one church service that decided we're going to make a point of having a communion supper, and that was one time in my 42 years of life that's happened. So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 17 through 34. Paul writes, "In the following directives, I have no praise for you." So he's not happy with the Corinthian church. "For your meetings do more harm than good." There's a lot to be said when a church's meetings do more harm than good. "In the first place, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions among you. And to some extent, I believe it." Sounds like there's a pretty fair case for the divisions being there if you have people saying, "I am of Paul, I'm of this teacher, I'm of Apollos, I'm of this teacher, and looking and allowing yourselves to be divided by bad communication with languages, allowing yourself to be divided by economic classes, being divided by being proud of some of the sins that your congregations are performing. He says, to some extent I believe it, but there must be something here. There must be something about the gospel in the Corinthian church that has Paul thinking, you know what? I believe it to an extent. If I was in Paul's shoes, I would be like, oh yeah, that's totally what's going on. But he says to some extent. And I think the gospel might be the reason why he says it's not absolute total division. Because he knows that the gospel is still there. Let's continue in verse 19. No doubt there have been differences among you to show which of you have God's approval. When you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper you eat. For as you eat, each of you goes ahead without waiting for anybody else. Could you imagine somebody just walking up? Something on my computer here? Okay. Just walking up to where they keep the bread, the communion bread, just grabbing it and going, ah. This was happening, apparently. Let's get back to when you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper you eat, for as you eat, each of you goes ahead without waiting for anybody else. One remains hungry, and another gets drunk. Could you imagine somebody grabbing the communion wine and saying, give me that Jesus juice. Praise God. It just seems absolutely nuts. But I think that says something else. He says, don't you have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? So apparently there's an economic aspect to what's going on. Apparently the wealthy felt entitled to the bread and the wine. I've seen different kinds of entitlement in different countries. And it seems like it's always different, but it like gets expressed differently, but it always has the core same thing. I have more, so I'm better than you. I deserve better than you. This is apparently one of the ways it was playing out in the Church of Corinth. When communion happened, people just were like, out of my way, give me the bread. I follow Paul. So there's no scholarly reason to believe that people were doing what I just did with my mouth. But yeah, there was a strong selfishness going on here. Now, another reason why I have trouble believing that this would be that communion was like what we like in the early Christian churches, what we experience now. Everybody gets a little bit of bread, everybody gets a little cup of wine. I have trouble believing that because it talks about people going home hungry. I mean, at this point, Why are we so ravenous that we would just take the the communion bread that is set aside and the wine, if that's if that's all there was? What's the big deal? It's like with a little stale cracker and a tiny sip of wine, you're still going home hungry. So it's implied that, I mean, if communion is your meal for the day, then you, in the modern day church, then we are definitely in a very poor spot. But the people who had nothing felt humiliated. This is something that the poor and the rich were supposed to be able to share in equally, and that wasn't happening. What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you for this? Certainly not. For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat the bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." So this is clearly a sacrament, and the experience of bread and wine metaphorically is something that is supposed to bring us closer together. But if it was just, a little bit that was enough for everybody, I don't think we would even be having this problem. I think it would be well established, okay, this is what it is, little sip of wine, little piece of bread, and get going. I don't think the issue would surface if there was not a meal happening. Therefore, whoever eats the bread and drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner is guilty of sinning against the body and the blood of the Lord. A man ought to examine himself before he eats the bread and drinks the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without recognizing the body of the Lord eats and drinks judgment on himself. That is why many among you are weak and sick, and a number of you have fallen asleep. I believe that spiritually, not physically. The weak and sick, and I think many of you have fallen asleep. It's obviously a spiritual metaphor. I mean, falling asleep in church, that's another problem. Not necessarily with the congregation, but, probably the pastor. But moving on to verse 31, and then I'll go back. But if we judge ourselves, we would not come under judgment. When we are judged by the Lord, we are being disciplined so that we will not be condemned with the world. Now, I've heard a lot of pastors stumble over this passage in regards to unity not being there. And if you have a problem with your brother in the church, then you need to work that out, because if you don't, and you take communion, you're a liar. Well, in the modern day church, people aren't necessarily coming together as a family. You may find those relationships in a church, and that's fantastic when you do. But that, but the modern, but many modern day churches do not necessitate that. I love it when that happens. I have made some fantastic, wonderful friends in churches, and that is something that I look forward to doing in the future when I start a church here. But I don't think many churches actually necessitate the feelings of friendship and family. It's a it's a shame, really, and this is one of the reasons why when I push towards planning a church here in Romania, I purposefully want there to be a strong sense of interaction. I dream of having a communion potluck. I think that this would be fantastic. Something where I could actually say before people partake in the bread and partake in the wine and say, hey guys, are we good? Are we okay with each other? Is there peace between us? Does anyone have something that they need to have sorted out? I think that would be absolutely fantastic. But if you're in an institution with about 600 to 5,000 people coming to the same place every week, and uh, and you decided that you know one person gets on your nerves, so you're going to sit on the other side of the church. You've already separated yourself in this pool of people that you know that may or may not you may not see for months at a time. You may know they're there and you haven't talked to that person in forever. And if you can make peace, that's great. If that would just be pearls before swine, that's pearls before swine. What can you do? I mean, we are family, but you can't know everybody. And when things are this vast, just because we are family positionally doesn't mean we experience each other as family. Now, some people would say that's an argument for smaller churches, and smaller churches that are able to do this are great. But I think that there can still be an intimacy in larger churches. Some people feel that the answer to that is small group Bible studies, and I think those are fantastic. I think those are very, very useful. But I also think it's very, very conspicuous that nobody tries to make this happen during the main sermon. I think it's very conspicuous that we all come together in the main sermon, drink a tiny little, maybe 1/4 of a shot glass of wine, and a nibble of a piece of bread. I think that we're missing out. I think that we could be coming together in a different way. And I think that if the Church of Corinth was meeting in people's houses and Paul was concerned about the division that was happening in among the Corinthian church, then it probably looked a lot different than a mega church where you would get lost in. Now, I think that these things can be handled. I think that people should seek forgiveness and seek unity among each other, no matter how big your church is. And I know that in some cases, that unity might not be possible. I remember so many people in my American Bible college gritting their teeth when they were angry at another Christian saying, "Oh, I love them in Christ." I love them in Christ, is what I just said. It's like, I love them in Christ. You know, because it's like, I can't say I hate that person, so it's like, God make me love them sort of thing while being angry. And that that feels like the wrong way to do it. I can relate. I really, really can. But I think that we have to keep in mind several factors of the church that Paul is talking to might not look anything like the church the churches that we come across regularly all over the world. Every church is different, but it seems like communion was being done differently. It seems like it was being done with a meal. It seems like the fellowship that communion was supposed to be bringing people together. And I don't know if that does it in if that really does it in any church. I mean, some people tell me, they feel something very, very special during that time of communion. And call me a heretic. Some have before. I don't necessarily feel closer to you because I'm thinking about Christ's sacrifice while this symbolism is happening. I get that we're together in the body. I get that he did that for all of us who are partaking. I appreciate that. I appreciate his sacrifice for my neighbors and for me. But I also know better than to say just because somebody tells me they're a Christian, that means that they are actually going to be as close to me as a brother or sister. I'd love it. I'd love for that wonderful, beautiful unity that's probably going to exist in heaven. But a simple going through the motions of the symbolism, I don't think this is helpful as many pastors believe it is. I think what was happening in Corinth was worth correcting for a reason. I think that there was a unity deficiency in Corinth, just like there is a unity deficiency in many, many churches all over the world. And telling me to go through the motions of symbolism and then insisting to me that I'm closer to everybody because of it. I feel it's lacking. I really, really do. And I am thankful for my brothers and sisters that I come together with in the church. I'm thankful that we can all appreciate the symbolism. But I would be absolutely stunned if somebody came to me before communion actually happened and said, "Brian, before we do this, I need you to forgive me." That would be like the rarest thing to ever happen. And you can't tell me that the number of times you have communion, somebody always, stops and goes over to somebody and saying, "We need to work this out before we do this." Come on. That doesn't happen. Let me continue with the closing of this passage. So then, my brothers, when you come together to eat, wait for each other. If anyone is hungry, he should eat at home, so that when you meet together, it may not result in judgment. Again, how many times would taking communion actually result in something where you even have to worry about judgment? Because what we get in communion is, I think, quite likely not what they were having there. And when I come, I will give you further directions. Of that I have no doubt. And he does give them further directions. He gives them further directions in another letter that we'll see, 2 Corinthians. That's what I'll be continuing with. I'll be finishing Paul's work with the Corinthians. This is my last 1 Corinthians Bible reading because I started the Bible reading in chapter 12. Go ahead and check that one out if you haven't already. It's about spiritual gifts. I thought that that was an important thing to be thinking about as I was processing, what would a church plant look like. And I still want to make that church plant happen. There are a lot of things that I want to do differently. You just heard my idea on a communion potluck. I think a communion potluck would be really, really cool. And I think it would be helpful. I think it would actually be an opportunity to socialize as is appropriate when we celebrate the cup and the bread, when we celebrate what Christ had done for us. Let's actually kind of start making a celebration of sacraments again. Why not? Why ever not? When I was baptized at, I believe it was Grace Bible Church, is where I had my believer's baptism. Nothing happened after that. This was a symbol of my understanding that I had come to salvation. It was a public profession of faith in my church. But, I went, I was dunked underwater, I was done. No one talked to me about it afterwards. It was just another standard church thing. When I got married, we celebrated, our friends were happy for us, and that's another sacrament, between me and my wife. We were unified as Christians are the bride of Christ, and have this spiritual intimacy with God. It just seems that when you look at sacraments, there's a lot to consider. In Romania, when infants are baptized, it is appropriately a big deal. People celebrate baptisms here in a really, really grand fashion. And I'm wondering why we don't try to make at least a casual celebration out of a lot of these things. My son was baptized in an Orthodox church, he will be he will probably want to have a believer's baptism. I think he will. And when he chooses to do that, I want there to be a celebration there. When we come together, you know, for communion, it seems like there should be something. You know, it's like we're falling short, and we've been falling short for a very, very long time in the sacrament department. I wonder, did anybody feel closer to me when I got baptized? I don't know. A lot of people were thrilled at my son's baptism, and they were thrilled at my weddings. I got married 3 times to the same woman because I wanted to bring people in on our relationship. I was living in Ireland at the time. We got married in Ireland. First, we got married in Romania, and then we got married in America. And I'm very, very thankful that people were able to be there and, in a way, to celebrate the gospel with us. But here, let's make a point to at least celebrate the gospel in our hearts. You know, I probably just offended a lot of people who were watching this, who were saying, "How dare you insult the way that we do communion? It's been like this forever, and if you think you can do better, then do it." I want to. I really, really do. I want to celebrate the gospel. I want people to look at this and realize, hey, this is what brings us together. But when we're sitting so quietly, I'll say one thing for the First Corinthian church: they weren't sitting there quietly. You know, they were a pretty raucous bunch. You know, so I mean, Paul had to tell people to be silent. He had to tell people to be silent uh, in their use of several languages. You had people who wanted to proclaim things, and some people didn't know what they were talking about because of the language barriers that existed in this cosmopolitan church. I really like what I'm learning here, and I really like what I feel very, very refreshed as I think about possibilities of what a church could be, and God willing, I'll see that happen in a church that me and people here in Rashad make together. I honestly think that something very, very special can happen in churches. You know, it's in churches across the world. Established institutions can start to ask the question, are we together? Are we like-minded? Are we needing each other? Are we brothers and sisters? I don't think it's unreasonable to ask the question, are we brothers and sisters? Rather than just assume positionally. It's like, well, we know the gospel, we're in the same place, we're good. This is a place where I think a lot of pastors fall short. And they just, because they're, in a way, they're in the center of the church mechanism, they lose sight of the importance of all the sheep that are actually there. And it's not like they can be everywhere at once. That's why they appoint positions of elders and deacons, though elders should be considered pastors. Honestly, I think many missionaries, men and women, should be considered pastors. It's if you look at the requirements, then that's something that should be there for them as well. It's most of the missionaries that are going out into the field fulfill the requirements that Paul puts out for pastoral ministry. What do I call this? Are we experiencing fast food communion? Have we been experiencing kind of a quickie communion for over 1,000 years? I I don't know exactly. God will tell me one day if I've been like too critical of the situation, but I don't think I am. I really don't think I am. But I thank all you brothers and sisters who are are with me in the fact that Christ paid the price on the cross for our sins, that his body was broken and his blood was spilled for the sake of our forgiveness, a forgiveness that's now available to the world. That relationship with God is there for us, and it's an amazing thing. Let's make something that's beyond a spectacle to celebrate it. And when I say spectacle, it I I can't help but wonder how often it's just been a show for thousands of years. I don't mean because a certain style of music is playing in the background. I don't mean that that we're doing it just to try to put on the appearance of being a good Christian for the people who are watching us on Sundays. I mean, what else could it be we don't when we just stand in line, grab our little bit, and we don't even talk to each other? People could at least go and like work things out, apparently, before they did this. Here it's on the agenda. You open up your church program and it's like, and communion at the end. If you have a problem with somebody else in the congregation, you'd have to like, it's like, okay, what's happening at the middle or the end? Or it's like, okay, it's like, I gotta get to Joe before communion happens. It, I guess if the problem's there, and you could try to fix it before Sunday morning, sort things out. But I don't know. It just seems so different. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed these videos. I hope they inspire you a little bit to think about the way that we're approaching church. It definitely has me re-examining what church is, because church is supposed to be people. It's supposed to be more than a building. It's supposed to be more than an institution. And I want to put something together where that can happen. Where if things need to be sorted out, people can sort them out. Where, because you don't have to talk to anyone in church. I don't know if anyone's had that awkward handshaking moment where the pastor stops everyone and says, "Say hi to the person next to you. Shake their hand, maybe. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them what their name is if you don't know what their name is." It's like the awkwardness of speed dating, except none of the desire to necessarily work anything out between anybody who's around you. There's a lot of things that I'm seeing in First Corinthians, and you'll see some more of that if you go down the playlist that I'm making after all of this is published. There's going to be another video, whatever day this is. I'm pre-recording them and trying to put one out on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and eventually, hopefully I'll work my way through the Bible. But these are some conclusions that I'm going to. Usually my conclusions probably will be more at the last chapter. But because this is the last one I'm doing, the last recording I'm doing in First Corinthians, I wanted to talk about that more. So I encourage everybody to really explore unity in the body. Maybe if you have friends in your church where you can sit down and actually have a coffee with them, because yes, I believe that's important. I've had people talk to me, it's like, oh, church people think that going to church is like going to have a cup of coffee. It's like, maybe part of it is. Maybe part of it is actually meeting the people, being people together, being human, being the creation of man being made in God's image and working that out together. If you have a brother and sister that you can sit down and have coffee with, try to do that. Ask the question, are we the body of Christ? Are we unified? Is fellowship happening? How is it happening? Is it happening well? Is it happening for everybody? Are certain people left out for any variety of reasons? Because they're too poor, because they're new, because they're different, because they're quiet, because they're loud and they scare you. Are we the body? Are we family? Are we church? My answer is sometimes. Sometimes we are. But it's got to be more than some sort of meeting of religious patriotism every Sunday. It's got to be more than taking your sip of wine and your piece of bread and saying, "Yep, we sure are together." I have emotional connections that I love and I value and I found in church buildings. There are people, and I think every church that I've been to, who are still church to me. There are people that have just faded into the background for me as much as I have faded into the background for them. I've literally lived inside two churches. One in Dublin on Adelaide Road, one in the town of Hatsukaichi in Hiroshima in Japan. And there are a few people who still stay in contact with me. But to a lot of them, it feels like I was just a temporary decoration that was there for a season or two. Well, I pray that there can be more actual living church that we can all experience. I pray that I can help people here in Brasov have that experience beyond language barriers, beyond all sorts of social and cultural barriers. I pray that we can come together with our various spiritual gifts, with our abilities, with our passions, and help each other as we live together, as we push together for the sake of knowing God better. Thanks for your time, for looking at another video. And I'll keep doing these one-take videos, and the next one will be in 2 Corinthians. I'm looking forward to that. Hope you enjoyed this one, and wherever you find yourself, if you are a Christian, be the church. Be the church. Really, that's the message that I want to live as I try to help a fellowship to happen. Thanks, guys. I am out, and that is one book of the Bible. Check out the playlist. Maybe at this point you are checking out the playlist and are seeing it there. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and if you see a link to my Patreon page, consider supporting me, because this is going to go to help me make these videos, and in a way it's going to help support me as I endeavor to be part of the church that I think should happen here in Transylvania. So God bless. La Papa.